When I look back at my childhood, the first thing that always stands out is not a moment, not an achievement, not even a memory of warmth. It is simply him. The golden boy. The one my parents praised into a living portrait of perfection. His name was Adrian, but in our house he didn't even need a name. He was the pride, the promise, the one who would take this family far. I used to think those words were harmless, but the older I grew, the more I realized they were bricks, stacked carefully to build a throne for him while building a wall around me, one that kept me out of every conversation, every decision, every dream my parents crafted. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything, but first, if you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% viewers who click on the like button. It makes us really happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories. It will be great to tell us where you are watching us from in the comment section. Now let's get into the details of the story. Growing up in that kind of shadow doesn't happen suddenly. It starts slowly, like a quiet leak that fills a room drop by drop until you're drowning without noticing how deep the water has become. I remember being 10 when I first understood what favoritism truly meant. Adrian got in trouble at school for shoving another kid, yet somehow the story my parents believed was that he had been defending himself against bullies. Meanwhile, the same week I got scolded for coming home with a torn book cover because I wasn't careful enough. Even then it didn't feel fair, but I convinced myself it wasn't intentional. Maybe they were just worried about him. Maybe they didn't realize they were making me feel smaller every time they lifted him up. But by the time I reached my final year of high school, it was impossible to pretend anymore. Everything, absolutely everything, revolved around him, and I was expected to orbit quietly like a forgotten moon around a shining star. The day everything exploded started as an ordinary morning, the kind where the sun seems too bright for the kind of storm waiting beneath it. I had worked for months on a community development project that counted for almost 30% of my final grade. It wasn't just an assignment, it was my hope, my chance to prove myself, maybe earn the scholarship my parents were not willing to support because they insisted Adrian would need the resources more. When I woke up that morning, the last thing I expected was to watch everything I had built crumble, not by accident, but by the very hands of the person who was supposed to be my family. I entered the living room to find Adrian flipping through my neatly arranged research papers, his fingers smudging the edges as he skimmed them with carelessness that made my stomach twist. I didn't raise my voice when I asked him to stop. I didn't even sound angry. But he smirked, a slow curl of satisfaction, and said, "Relax. It's not like you're actually going to win anything." Nobody had prepared me for the sound of 50 hours of work tearing in half. He ripped the spine of my project file in one swift motion, letting the pages fall to the ground like defeated birds. I froze, my chest squeezing as though air had suddenly become a luxury. He stepped over the papers as he walked away, humming casually as though nothing important had happened. Something inside me snapped, not loud, not dramatic, but sharp, like a quiet crack in glass that spreads until the whole window shatters. For the first time in years I confronted him. I picked up the torn pages, my voice trembling as I followed him outside and demanded to know why he would do something so cruel. Instead of apologizing, he laughed, a cold, hollow sound, and whispered, "Because watching you try is annoying." Maybe I could have walked away. Maybe I should have. But the truth felt radioactive in my chest, desperate to explode. I told him the truth right there in front of two neighbors who happened to pass by, that he was spoiled, manipulative, and selfish. I said it loudly enough that even the birds on the electric wire paused. Adrian froze, his face twisting with a rage I had never seen before. He stormed into the house, and within minutes, I heard him telling my parents the story, but rewritten in the way only he could do it. According to him, I had attacked him. I had insulted him for no reason. I had tried to embarrass the family in front of the neighbors. By the time I walked back inside, my parents were staring at me like I was a stranger, one who had committed an unforgivable crime. I tried to defend myself, but the truth had already been twisted beyond recognition. My father told me I had become disrespectful. My mother insisted I had lost my way. They demanded that I apologize to Adrian, not for tearing my project, not for humiliating me, but for speaking to him without respect. When I refused, their anger became something heavy and thunderous. They accused me of pride, of stubbornness, of trying to ruin Adrian's bright future. And then came the punishment, delivered with the kind of finality that steals breath from your lungs. Until you are ready to apologize, my father said, his voice steady and cold, you are not returning to school. Not one step. The silence that followed felt like a rope tightening around my throat. I stared at them, waiting for one of them to take it back, to say it was said in anger. But they stood together, united in their decision, while Adrian watched from behind them with a glimmer of smug victory in his eyes. The world around me blurred. My future, everything I had worked for, was placed on pause, not because I had failed but because I refused to bow. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the day in painful loops. One fact burned like fire inside me. My parents had chosen him again. Adrian, the golden boy. Adrian, the perfect one. Adrian, the son they revolved around. Me. I was nothing more than an inconvenience. But as I stared into the darkness, feeling the weight of their betrayal pressing into my ribs, something shifted inside me. Something quiet but powerful. If they thought stopping my school would break me, they were wrong. If they believed I would crawl back begging for forgiveness, they didn't know me at all. They had built a golden boy, but they were about to discover what happens when the child they pushed into the shadows decides to step out. The morning after my parents suspended my schooling felt unnaturally quiet, as though the entire house had agreed to communicate only in whispers. Even the clock on the wall ticked with a softness I had never noticed before, like it was afraid to draw attention to itself. I woke up expecting the usual rush of preparing for class, the scraping of chairs at the dining table, the sound of feet moving back and forth, the smell of tea, but there was nothing. Instead, I lay in bed with a stillness that felt wrong, like waking up in someone else's life. The moment I remembered why everything felt different, a heavy weight settled on my chest. My parents' decision wasn't a bad dream. It wasn't a threat they would take back. They had done it. They had actually cut me off from school simply because I refused to bow to the golden boy. When I finally stepped out of my room, I found my mother in the kitchen washing dishes with movements that were too calm to be real. She didn't look up when I entered, but I could see her jaw tighten slightly, the way she always did when she was trying to appear unbothered. I greeted her quietly, hoping she might respond with at least a hint of the mother I knew before all of this. But all she said was, "Your father wants to speak to you after breakfast," in a tone that made the food on the table taste bitter before I even touched it. Across the room, Adrian sat with a bowl of cereal, pretending he didn't hear anything. He didn't even glance at me. His silence was louder than any insult he could have said. It was the silence of someone who believed he had won. I sat down at the table, unable to swallow more than a few bites. My father walked in a few minutes later with the newspaper tucked under his arm, like he was preparing for an ordinary day rather than the aftermath of turning his child's life upside down. He looked at me with a firm expression, the kind he used when he wanted me to know a decision was final. "Since you've chosen disrespect," he began without emotion, "you will stay home until you are ready to act like part of this family." The words hit me hard, not because of the punishment but because of how easily he said them. It was as though they had rehearsed this response for years, just waiting for the right moment to use it. Adrian shifted slightly in his seat, a tiny smirk dancing at the edge of his mouth even though he pretended to be focused on his cereal. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream the truth, to remind them that the person they were protecting was the same one who tore my project to pieces. But every time I opened my mouth, the air felt too thick to breathe. My father continued talking, telling me that until they saw remorse, there would be no allowance, no school, no privileges. I was to stay home, help with chores, and reflect on my attitude. The irony of being punished for defending myself wrapped around my throat like a cold vine. I watched the golden boy stand up from the table with exaggerated politeness, greeting everyone except me before heading out the door with his backpack. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like a verdict being sealed. Hours passed slowly. The house felt like a cage, each room reminding me of everything I was losing. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, folding clothes, sweeping, and reorganizing shelves, but nothing filled the emptiness created by the sudden absence of my routine. At noon, I sat by the window and watched students in uniforms pass by, heading to school with the energy I wished I still had. It felt like a punishment designed specifically for my soul, watching life move on without me. For the first time, a small part of me wondered if my parents were right, if maybe standing up to Adrian had been a mistake. But before that doubt could take root, a voice inside me, small but fierce, whispered that truth never deserved punishment. Later in the afternoon, while collecting my notebooks from my room, I found something I hadn't noticed before. One of my storage boxes had been moved. It wasn't the type of thing that would normally mean anything, but the box had always been under my bed, placed neatly in the corner. Now it sat slightly crooked with the lid not fully aligned. A strange chill crawled up my spine. When I opened it, I realized that the envelope where I kept some of my project notes had been tampered with. The papers were stacked out of order. Some pages were wrinkled in ways I didn't remember. It didn't take long for me to connect the dots. Adrian had not only destroyed the main project, he had searched through my belongings, hunting for anything else he could ruin. That discovery lit a fire in my chest, a sharp spark of anger mixed with something stronger, resolve. I spent the rest of the day inspecting everything in my room. That was when I found something I never expected. Hidden under my desk drawer, tucked behind a loose wooden panel, was a folded sheet of paper with Adrian's handwriting. I unfolded it slowly, my pulse quickening. It wasn't just any note. It was a copy of an email he had written to his teacher months ago, bragging about paying someone to complete his assignment for him because he had better things to do. The arrogance in the words made my skin crawl. Not only had he cheated, but he had been careless enough to hide evidence in my room, probably thinking I would never find it. And now in my hands I held proof, real, undeniable proof, that the golden boy's shine was built on lies. I sat on the floor for a long time, staring at the paper, letting the truth sink into me like sunlight through a window. This wasn't just about my broken project anymore. This was about the entire structure of favoritism and deception that had held me down for years. My parents believed Adrian could do no wrong, but here was the wrong, written in his own handwriting. I didn't know what I would do with it yet. I didn't know if revealing it would fix anything or just make my life worse. But what I did know was this: the power balance in this house had shifted even if nobody else knew it yet. For years, Adrian had used his parents' trust as a shield, but now I held something that could crack that shield open. That night, as the house settled into silence, I lay awake replaying the day in my head. The humiliation, the isolation, the discovery, it all mixed into a storm that refused to let me sleep. But under all of it, a determination grew. I had been punished for telling the truth, but I wouldn't stay silent anymore. If they thought removing me from school would break me, they were wrong. They had pushed me into a corner, but ironically, that corner had given me a clearer view of everything I needed to see. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a war I no longer feared fighting. The next morning came with a strange heaviness, the kind that settles in your bones before your eyes even open. I lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wondering how a single argument could rip through my life with such force. It almost felt surreal that my schooling, my future, was now suspended over something so unfair it would have sounded unbelievable if someone else told me the story. But the unfairness wasn't even the part that shook me the most. It was the quiet knowledge that my parents had not hesitated. They had not paused, not questioned, not investigated. They believed Adrian instantly, believed him enough to punish me in the most severe way possible. And it was that realization that pushed me out of bed that morning with a mix of anger and clarity simmering beneath my skin. As I walked through the hallway, the house felt strangely hollow. My parents were already preparing for work, dressed neatly and speaking in their usual morning tones, as though nothing monumental had happened the day before. My mother adjusted her earrings while reminding my father about a meeting they were both attending, and my father scanned his phone with a relaxed posture that made me wonder if he had even slept peacefully after dismantling my future. When they saw me, their expressions shifted, not to regret or concern but to a cold, disciplined neutrality. "Good morning," I said, forcing my voice not to shake. They responded shortly, and then my father added, "We expect you to use this time wisely. Reflect on your actions." Reflect. That was the word he chose. Not heal, not recover, not even explain. Just reflect, as though I had been the architect of my own downfall. After they left the house, silence settled like dust in every corner. I stood in the living room for a long moment, unsure what to do with the hours stretching endlessly before me. Should I start rewriting my project? Should I try to rest? Or should I focus on the thing that had clawed into my thoughts all night? The folded paper I found in my desk drawer. I walked back into my room and retrieved it from the place I had hidden it, under my pillow where it rested like a secret heartbeat. I unfolded it slowly, examining the handwriting again. Adrian's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp letters, slightly slanted, the same style he used whenever he wrote notes for school or signed documents. This wasn't something I imagined. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was clear proof that Adrian had paid someone to do his work. The email was addressed to a classmate I vaguely remembered seeing once at a school event. In the message, Adrian was bragging about paying him to handle the boring assignment, and mocking the teacher for thinking he actually worked hard for once. Those words sat like acid on the paper, burning through every illusion my parents had built about him. As I sat on the floor reading the message for the 10th time, a thought slowly formed in my mind. Not impulsive, not angry, but precise. If Adrian had cheated once, he could have cheated many times. If he was bold enough to hide the evidence in my room, he must have more secrets. And if he had more secrets, then maybe, just maybe, I could use them to expose the truth. For the rest of the morning I searched my room again, looking for anything else that seemed out of place. I checked under my bed, behind bookshelves, inside old notebooks, and even in the pockets of clothes I hadn't worn in years. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, only that I felt compelled to search. And then, tucked beneath a pile of unused folders, I found something that made my breath hitch. A small flash drive. It wasn't mine. I plugged it into my old laptop, my palms sweating as I waited for it to load. It contained only one folder labeled Personal. Inside it were screenshots, conversations, and more emails. Some involving teachers, others involving students, and several involving transactions. At first glance, it looked like he had been buying assignments for months. But then I realized it was worse. He had been selling exam papers too. The screenshots showed conversations where classmates offered him money in exchange for answers. Adrian wasn't just cheating. He was running a small academic crime ring. My heart thudded against my ribs as I scrolled through the files. Part of me felt horrified, but another part felt something else. Vindication. All my life I had been treated like the lesser child, the one who could do nothing right, the one who had to work twice as hard to get half the praise Adrian received for merely breathing. Meanwhile, Adrian had been climbing ladders built on deceit. It wasn't just unfair. It was twisted. And now I held the threads that could unravel everything he had wrapped himself in so tightly. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think clearly. If I confronted him with this information, he would deny it, twist the story, maybe even hide or destroy the evidence. And if I went straight to my parents without a plan, they might accuse me of forging everything just to bring him down. No, I needed something stronger. Something undeniable. I spent hours organizing the files, printing out some of the most incriminating conversations, and backing up everything to multiple devices. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Adrian wasn't a victim of pressure or poor judgment. He was intentional, calculating, and manipulative. His entire academic record was a fraud. And if the school ever got their hands on this, he could be expelled instantly. The power of that knowledge was overwhelming, not because I intended to destroy him, but because I finally understood the truth. He wasn't golden because he was brilliant. He was golden because my parents painted him that way. His shine was artificial. Manufactured. And I had finally found the light switch. Later in the afternoon, while I sat reviewing the last of the files, I heard the front door open. My pulse jumped. Adrian was home. I quickly hid the printed papers inside a textbook and slipped the flash drive into my pocket. I didn't plan to confront him yet, but I wasn't about to let him out of my sight. I stepped into the hallway just as he entered, his backpack slung lazily over his shoulder, his phone in his hand as he typed a message with an amused smirk on his lips. When he looked up and saw me standing there, his expression shifted, not to guilt but to irritation. "Why are you staring at me like that?" he said casually. "Shouldn't you be reflecting or whatever?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied his face, the relaxed confidence in his posture, the arrogance that came from years of never facing consequences. He walked past me toward his room, humming lightly, the same way he did the day he tore my project apart. For a moment, I considered confronting him then and there, forcing him to look at what I had found. But something told me to wait. The story wasn't ready to break open yet. Not until every piece was aligned. Not until the truth could explode so loudly that even my parents couldn't ignore it. So I let him pass, and he didn't look back. That night, as I lay on my bed staring into the soft glow of the lamp, I realized something important. I was no longer afraid. For the first time in years, I felt something like strength slipping back into my bones. They had punished me for telling the truth, but they had also given me something they hadn't intended: time. Time to see clearly. Time to see clearly. Time to uncover what had always been hidden beneath Adrian's golden mask. Time to prepare for a confrontation that would change everything in this house forever. And as I closed my eyes, one thought echoed through me like a promise. They suspended my education to break me, but all they did was give me the chance to reveal the truth they never wanted to see. For 2 days, I moved around the house like a quiet shadow, storing evidence, studying patterns, and preparing myself for a confrontation that felt heavier than anything I had ever faced. My parents noticed the change in my behavior, though they misunderstood it. My silence looked like submission to them, a sign that I was finally ready to behave. Adrian noticed something different too, though he didn't have the intelligence to understand it fully. He just narrowed his eyes whenever he saw me, as if some instinct deep inside him sensed that the power he enjoyed might not always remain in his hands. Still, he walked the hallways with his usual careless confidence, humming songs, laughing on the phone, and pretending I didn't exist. But beneath his facade, tiny cracks were beginning to show, cracks I was ready to widen. On the third morning, I awoke with a strange combination of calm and fire pulsing through me. I knew it was time. I had spent hours organizing the evidence into a neat file, labeling each page and screenshot so nothing could be dismissed or questioned. I even printed multiple copies in case someone tried to destroy the first one. The flash drive was tucked securely into my pocket, and for the first time in days, I felt like my heartbeat matched a steady rhythm rather than the frantic chaos I had been carrying. My parents were in the living room, preparing for another long day at work, when I walked in with the file in my hands. They glanced at me briefly, probably expecting me to announce my apology to Adrian. They couldn't have been more wrong. My father lowered his newspaper, and my mother paused mid-sentence as I stood before them. No trembling, no hesitation, just truth ready to burst free. "I have something to show you," I said, my voice firm in a way I didn't recognize. They exchanged confused glances, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of discomfort in their expressions. Not fear, yet, but the early signs of a shift. I placed the file onto the coffee table and slid it toward them. My mother reached for it first with a skeptical frown, flipping it open to the first page. The moment her eyes scanned the printed email, her expression changed. Subtle at first, then deeper as she flipped to the next page and the next. My father leaned closer, his fingers tightening around the edges of the paper as though the truth physically resisted him. I watched their faces move through stages I had never seen in them before. Confusion, disbelief, denial, and finally, slow, stinging shock. When I spoke, my voice was calm. Adrian didn't just lie about what happened. He's been cheating. For months. And he's been selling exam answers. I paused, letting the weight sink in. This is proof. The room filled with a suffocating silence. My father flipped through the pages quickly now, almost aggressively, as if speed could force the truth to be less real. My mother's hand trembled slightly, and her lips parted without any words forming. It was the first time I had seen either of them look unsure about Adrian. The golden boy had been untouchable for so long that the idea of wrongdoing must have felt like a foreign language to them. Before they could gather their thoughts, the front door opened and Adrian walked in, laughing loudly on the phone as usual, before freezing mid-step when he saw the file in their hands. His smile vanished instantly. His eyes darted from them to me, and I watched panic ripple beneath his skin like a trapped animal suddenly realizing the cage door had closed. "What is this?" my father asked, his voice low, sharp, and dangerous. Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it again, his confidence collapse quick and messy. He stuttered at first, searching for excuses, but the evidence on the table spoke louder than any lie he could muster. My mother held up one of the printed screenshots, her voice cracking slightly as she asked, "Did you really do this? All of this?" For the first time in my life, I watched Adrian lose his smooth composure. His voice rose defensively, his words tumbling out too quickly. "It's not what it looks like. People are trying to set me up. You know how jealous everyone is." But there was no conviction in his voice. He reached for the file as if to grab it, but my father slammed his hand down on it with a force that made Adrian flinch. I had never seen my father look so betrayed. What followed was a storm, chaotic, loud, and deeply revealing. My parents questioned him sharply, demanding explanations he couldn't provide. Every lie he offered fell apart instantly under the weight of the evidence. When he tried to claim the emails were fake, I handed my father the flash drive and told him he could verify everything on my laptop. Adrian turned toward me then, his eyes wild, a mixture of fear and fury swirling together. "You went through my things?" he shouted, but his accusation held no power, no sting. My father snapped, "Don't turn this on them." The shock of that moment washed over me. For the first time in years, my father was defending me instead of Adrian. It was like watching a kingdom crumble in slow motion. But the most powerful moment came when my mother asked the question that finally broke Adrian's mask. "Have you been lying to us all this time?" That question hung in the air like a blade. Adrian said nothing. No lie, no denial, nothing. And his silence was louder than any confession. My parents sat back slowly, the truth settling heavy in their chests. The golden boy had fallen. Not because I pushed him, but because he built himself on weak foundations. When my parents finally turned to me, guilt painted their faces in a way I had only ever imagined in quiet dreams. My father spoke first, his voice strained. "We were wrong." The words felt like a crack of thunder inside me. Adrian, desperate and shaking now, grabbed his backpack and made for the door as though escaping the room could erase the truth. But my father called his name sternly, telling him they would be discussing consequences and the school would be informed. Hearing that made Adrian snap. He turned to me with an expression that was half hatred, half desperation. "You're ruining everything," he yelled, as though I was the one who forged his emails, or made him sell exam papers, or carved deceit into the heart of his academic life. But I said nothing. He needed to hear the silence of someone who no longer carried fear. When he finally stormed off to his room, slamming the door with a force that rattled the walls, my parents remained seated in the living room, deflated and shaken. My mother wiped her eyes and my father exhaled deeply before looking at me again. "We owe you an apology," he said, a sentence I never expected to hear in my lifetime. In that moment, something inside me softened and hardened at the same time. I appreciated their apology, but I also knew my scars would not vanish with a few words. They had suspended my future for a lie. They had chosen Adrian over me without hesitation. And now they were facing the truth they never wanted to see. Still, I nodded, accepting their apology quietly. I was not ready to trust them fully again, but I was ready to move forward. The truth was out. The fall had happened. And the ground beneath us would never be the same again. I didn't even wait for him to finish his sentence. I stepped fully into the hallway, the echo of my footsteps bouncing off the walls like a warning bell. And the moment he saw me, his fake confidence snapped like a brittle twig. His lips trembled, his eyes darted away, and for a moment, I almost pitied him because I could finally see what nobody else had noticed. Underneath all the applause he received simply for existing, underneath all the protection my parents gave him while tearing me apart, he was just a scared little boy drowning in lies he didn't know how to undo. But pity couldn't save him now, and I wasn't here to comfort him. I was here to tell the truth he had been running from. "You're going to tell them," I said, my voice sharp enough to slice through every shield he had built around himself, and he swallowed hard, gripping the railing like it could keep him from collapsing under the weight of what was coming. "You're going to walk downstairs with me, you're going to look them in the eye, and you're going to say every single thing you've been hiding." He whispered my name, barely audible, like he was begging for a mercy I had spent months being denied. But I wasn't here for mercy. I was here for justice. So I grabbed the truth with both hands and forced him into the light, whether he liked it or not. We walked downstairs together. Him trembling, me steady, and the moment my parents saw us, they looked relieved at first, like they thought we had finally resolved everything the way they preferred. Quietly, secretly, and with me carrying the blame. But their relief shattered when Golden Boy stopped 3 steps from the bottom of the staircase, his chest rising and falling in uneven waves, and said the words that froze the entire room. "I lied," he began, and my mother blinked in confusion while my father's jaw tightened. "I lied about everything. It wasn't them. It wasn't their fault. It was me. I messed up. I panicked. I blamed them because I didn't want to be the disappointment." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like gravity doubled inside that living room. My mother staggered back like she had been physically struck, my father's face drained of color, and for the first time in my life, the golden shine they wrapped him in cracked, revealing the truth they had been too blind to see. My father demanded to know why he had lied. My mother started whispering, "No, no, no. over and over like she was trying to undo reality, and Golden Boy broke down completely, confessing every detail. How he had failed, how he had panicked, how he had used me as a shield, how he had allowed them to punish me for something he had never been brave enough to admit. And all I did was stand there, not victorious, not angry, not bitter, just finally free. But freedom, as I soon realized, was not peace. After the confession, after the shouting, after the shock, my parents turned toward me with faces that were no longer strict or angry but ashamed, deeply, painfully ashamed. My mother tried to speak, but her voice cracked. My father reached for me, but I stepped back because some wounds don't disappear simply because the truth is finally spoken. They apologized, over and over, and begged for a chance to fix things, to make it up to me, to rebuild what had been broken. And while a small part of me wanted to fall apart and let them hold me, a bigger part of me knew I needed something more than apologies. I needed to reclaim myself. That evening, after hours of conversation, crying, silence, and truth, they promised me something. No more choosing sides, no more unfair punishments, no more blind favoritism. They would pay for my return to school, they would support me, they would listen to me, and they would finally treat me like their child, not their scapegoat. But even with all that, I realized something important. Getting justice didn't erase the pain. It only opened the door for healing. And healing, as I knew now, was something I had to choose for myself. One step, one truth, one breath at a time. So I walked outside, looked up at the night sky, and took the deepest breath I had taken in years. My story wasn't ending here. This was only the chapter where I reclaimed my voice. The chapter where I broke the cycle. The chapter where I learned that family isn't defined by obedience. It's defined by truth, respect, and courage. And as I took another breath, I whispered the words that had lived in my chest for far too long. I'm done apologizing for things that were never my fault.